This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is Meg Skinner. Meg works as an invertebrate ecologist, surveying sites for protected species, and she volunteers for the British Arachnological Society. We're talking today about spiders in your garden, how they go about their business, how you can encourage more to visit your garden. Oh, and we talk about the much maligned false widow.
So the BAS is completely run by volunteers. We're a charity, and the aims is to kind of educate people a little bit more about all arachnids, not just spiders, but all arachnids in the UK. We have a website with sort of species distribution maps, resources and information for people of all ages and all abilities. We've just launched a brand new YouTube channel as well. Well, a couple of years ago, but it's getting there. It's up and running anyway. So there's all sorts of videos about kind of spiders in the world. There's talks and just a little bit of field ID work and how to find spiders in your garden, how to photograph them, things like that. We want to educate people about spiders, but also gather information for scientific studies. So we have recording schemes, we call them. One for spiders, one for harvestmen, which is the one that I run. And we gather people's records and sightings of everything that they've seen to try and map kind of species distributions, whether there's any changes, whether there's any new species, and for conservation efforts as well.
Brilliant. So you said there, arachnids, not just spiders. So can you actually elaborate on that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different types of arachnids in the world. We usually just think of the spiders, but there are, in Britain anyway, there's kind of mites and things which we're not amazingly well educated on because they're quite obscure. But we do cover pseudoscorpions, which some of you might be familiar with, particularly if you've got compost heaps or kind of piles of leaf litter around. They look like tiny little scorpions, a couple of millimeters long, but without the tail, but they've got the little claws. So that's the type of arachnid. Harvestmen as well is something that people might have seen about, also called daddy longlegs. They look like crane flies, but without the wings. So like very, very long-legged spiders, but with just one body segment on there. So they are another type of arachnid. And yeah, of course, spiders as well.
I can't think of a harvestman, actually. I'm not sure I know what they look like. Do they look a bit like the spindly house spiders?
A bit like spindly house spiders, yeah. But you see the ones sort of in the corner of your room that make those little dusty cobwebs. They'll have an abdomen and another segment, which is called the cephalothorax. So that's kind of a thorax and a head molded into one. Harvestmen are a little bit different because they don't spin webs and they are just one body segment. So it's just one blob with very, very long legs, 8 legs as well, just like a spider.
I do know what you're talking about. Yes, yeah, they've got a very sort of ovally round body, haven't they? They're quite distinctive, yeah. Oh, so you're recording those at the moment, are you?
Yeah, recording those as well. There's only sort of about 35 species, so it's quite a small group. But we are seeing a lot of changes and a few different species over in recent years coming over from Europe, and they're kind of spreading around a little bit. So quite exciting, really. They're very mobile.
Are they on the incline then?
Some species are, yeah. We're having a few kind of larger species from Europe that kind of persist more into winter. So they tend to survive a little bit longer than the other ones. So there might be a little bit of competition there. But I'm kind of keeping an eye on things, seeing how they go.
So how many species of spiders are there in the UK? Is that a very difficult question to answer?
So there's around 650 species of spiders in the UK. Spider numbers are slightly subject to change because, as I said before, they're really good dispersers. So we do get kind of new species coming in and out of the country. And then sometimes taxonomists have decided that one species is actually 2 or the other way around. So it's around 650. But globally, there's between 400 and 800 million metric tons of insects eaten by spiders every year. So they're a really significant group, and they definitely do a lot of good and a lot of considered bad in the UK, kind of pest control and things.
I mean, I would have always thought of them as beneficial, and it's an interesting point that you've raised there, and I was going to ask you about that. What is it that they eat? And that leads on to what is it that they do that's a nuisance to people?
Spiders eat all sorts, pretty much every species of spider in the world. I mean, no, there'll be some exceptions somewhere. Pretty much all of them are carnivorous, completely carnivorous. So they feed on small invertebrates, insects and other things. There are spiders that live in water and can eat kind of invertebrates and even fish in water, but pretty much all the time they'll eat anything smaller than them that they can find. They're mostly generalists, but some species kind of sit and wait on flowers and rely on pollinators that come to flowers as their prey. There's not too many kind of specialist groups. But yeah, within the garden, think about spiders as your pest control. You know, things like midges, aphids, sometimes they'll hunt things that they don't necessarily predate on. So a lot of the time, if you see a spider about and you see a load of aphids on a plant, it might be that there's loads of dead aphids because the spider hasn't actually eaten them, they've just predated them. But yeah, all the nasty things that people don't like, things like midges, aphids, mosquitoes, sawflies, spiders are probably going to be eating them. So it is good to have spiders in your garden.
When you say predated them, what's the difference between that and eating them?
What I mean by that is killing them without necessarily eating them. And sometimes you might see a spider that's, if it's a web builder, it might have killed a few little invertebrates, wrapped them up in its silk and not necessarily eaten them straight away.
So it's just saving them basically for later.
Yeah, saving them for later.
And so going on to why people might consider them a pest, why is that?
I think people just generally have a bad attitude to them, especially kind of the big house spiders that will come into your house sort of early autumn time. It's usually the males that are roaming around wandering looking for females. But I think it's just this social stigma of, we don't like things coming into our house, particularly if they're 8 legs and they're a little bit erratic. I wouldn't consider spiders as pests. They're not really going to affect your plants necessarily. They provide really good food sources for birds and other invertebrates. And like I said, they are eating the things that are considered pests. So I wouldn't personally consider a spider as a pest, but
no,
that's debatable.
Well, as you say, maybe it's just the fact that some people find them scary. But in terms of the general ecosystem, they sound like they're really useful. Like you say, they're a food source as well for other species.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of spiders occupy every single niche that you might have in your garden. Little jumping spiders that you might see running on walls and fences, they don't really build webs, but they'll kind of hunt in warmer places, more exposed places. And we'll see the web builders. The garden cross spider is the main one that you'll come across, sort of late summertime. These big sort of orb weavers that sit in the middle of their web, and they look like they've got a white cross on their abdomen. And those are predominantly web builders. They'll sit there and just wait for everything to come to them. But you'll also get spiders, say wolf spiders, kind of running around at ground level. And they're the ones that we also see the females with big egg sacs on their abdomens, which eventually turn into babies on their abdomens. So they're, again, not predominantly web builders, but they kind of predate at ground level. So you get all sorts of different niches within your garden for spiders to occupy.
Yeah, I mean, even in like the darkest, dankest, discarded pots. And I had a birdhouse once that the birds had long since abandoned, and it sat on my shed for years. And I finally got round to taking it down, and there was this beautiful, shiny, black spider in there, which I think is a cave spider, is it?
Okay, yeah, sounds about right. Quite a big one.
Yes, it was big.
Yeah, like it's made of black leather, that sort of shiny appearance.
Yes, I was slightly terrified because it looked a bit malevolent, but I think the more that I've gardened, the more deconditioned I've come to spiders.
Yeah, and I think part of it is kind of that surprise element of, you turn over a stone and you don't realise that there's going to be a spider there. And sometimes they get scared as well. They run about a little bit erratically. And I think maybe that's where this fear sort of stems from. My colleague has found that there's one species of spider that he calls a traffic cone spider, because he's very insistent that most of the sightings that he's found is underneath traffic cones. So some of them do have a little bit of a preference. I don't know whether it's just nice and warm on the plastic and it's a nice little sort of tunnel for them to live in, but yeah, all the kind of cracks and crevices they'll definitely occupy.
I mean, I had an amazing one the other day that scuttled around. Well, in fact, there were 2, and they were a creamy beige colour with orange on them as well, in 2 sort of very distinct segments. I mean, they do come in all shapes and sizes as well. That's the amazing thing about them. There's, we have some really stunning spiders, don't we, in the UK?
We really do. And at the moment, I'm seeing a lot of people sharing photos on social media and seeing the spiders themselves of the white crab spiders, Misomena vatia. Now, usually they are white. Sometimes they go a little bit yellowish or have like pink stripes, depending on what flowers they're on. And they're the ones that are hard to see unless you see kind of a fly or a bee looking at a bit dead at a strange angle on a flower. And sometimes if you have a little closer look, then you might see a white spider clinging onto it. But they are absolutely stunning when you can see them.
Yeah, they're amazing. I quite often find those on roses for some reason. Yeah, they're very cool. And the other one that's sort of cropping up more often, I think, is the wasp spider.
Oh, right. Yeah, you in the southeast there?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Is it a southeast thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a couple of babies there last week. They are absolutely stunning.
Yeah, they're amazing things. So thinking about life cycle and breeding, you've mentioned the wolf spider with the egg sac. Do they all have egg sacs? Is that how spiders reproduce in general?
Not generally, no. So I'll talk you through the mating process quickly, as well as the egg laying, because that's really fascinating in itself. So when we see spiders out and about, you'll sometimes wonder, is it a male or a female? And spiders are quite dimorphic, meaning that they look really different if they're male or female. So the females are generally the ones with the really big abdomens, and the males have a lot smaller abdomens. They're generally smaller in size anyway. And the males have what look like little boxing gloves kind of on the front of their body, and that's what we call their palps. So they'll use their palps for mating, and that's to kind of just pass sperm into the female, but they're very unique in their shape. So every single species has a different shaped palp. It's kind of like a lock and key sort of mechanism. So have a look out for those when you see them. You might be able to tell if it's a male or a female. So yeah, some spiders do have the egg sacs. Some spiders kind of lay a little sort of nest. There's a species group called arrows, and they make what looks like a little basket kind of hanging down from a little bit of wood, or under a stone or something. It's got a string with a little blob on the end, and that blob's kind of weaved silk around the eggs. A lot of spiders will do that and then just kind of leave their babies to it. You might see again with the little garden spiders, the garden cross spiders, when they're babies, they're bright yellow and they've got a little black triangle on their back, and sometimes they're kind of clustered around because they've just emerged out of the egg sac. A lot of spiders will kind of just leave the eggs to it, but some of them, like the wool spiders, will carry them around for a bit, and then the babies will hitchhike on the mum's abdomen for a little bit, and she'll kind of help them feed and that before they find their own way. But you do get spiders all around the world that are really maternal. There's a concept also called matrophagy, which we'll find on David Attenborough documentaries and things. Sounds really gross, but it's really important for their life cycle. So the young will, once they emerge from the egg sac, the females kind of be taking care of the eggs as they go. And once they emerge, sometimes they'll eat their mother as a really good source of kind of sustenance and protein. So it means that the spider will only reproduce once, but they're putting everything that they possibly can into the survival of their babies.
Wow, that's dedication, that is. And thinking about silk, and again, I'm guessing not all spiders weave webs, is that right?
Not all spiders weave webs. Most spiders use silk, even just for wrapping up their prey. There's some tropical spiders that use them sort of as a net to catch their prey initially. But yeah, not all of them spin webs.
And is it an old wives' tale that they've only got a finite amount of silk to make a web with, and if you destroy it, then you're kind of jeopardising its chances?
I don't think so. I think, well, they can produce the web quite quickly. People do farm spiders for silk sometimes. I know there's a fashion designer that was making silk clothes out of spider silk. So it's not the end of the world if you destroy a web, and usually they're in really awkward places, which we're going to be walking through all the time. They can make the webs again really quickly. But yeah, web in itself is quite useful, because things like long-tailed tits and other birds will use the spider silk as kind of glue to make their nests out of. So it's a really good material for kind of holding their nest together if they're using other bits of moss and things.
Wow, that's interesting. I had no idea about that. And you're right, they do always put them in the most inopportune places. So yeah, sometimes I think
we have one that puts one right in front of the front door, and every single day she makes another one, puts it in the same place, makes another one.
Yeah. So have we got any species in the UK that are really under threat, and is there anything that people can do in their gardens to kind of help them?
We do have some threatened species. So, for example, the fen raft spider is quite restricted. That's an aquatic species, and we're doing some conservation work with those to improve their numbers. Again, living in fens on aquatic environments is not really like a garden environment. I'd say generally, if you can avoid things like pesticides, if you can, and just encourage a little bit of diversity into your garden, it will help all spiders in their population and all the ecosystem as well, because so many things rely on spiders, and it will keep the populations of other things down as predators. So you might find that there's a bit more diversity in your garden. So what I'd recommend is try and restrict the use of pesticides whenever possible. If you don't need to use them, brilliant. And just create a little bit of diversity. So I know bug hotels are quite popular at the moment, but even just kind of piles of old little bits of wood, bricks, slate will create like a nice little hidey hole for spiders to live in, as well as promoting different types of plants, native species whenever possible, just to create more habitat for other species that the spiders will then come in and colonize, because spiders are really good dispersers. So bring in everything else and the spiders will come.
Yeah, and that's interesting as well that you said a sort of diversity of habitats, because as you said, they're very sort of versatile in terms of where they live. So yeah, I guess having a kind of network of different habitats in the garden is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people now with gardening, they're thinking more about the 3 Bs, bees, butterflies and birds. And it's much more of an emphasis nowadays than it used to be on, saving the bees, creating habitats for them, planting native wildflowers, and just creating that diversity. It's really, really important, not just for those big animals, but spiders as well. And spiders are an important role there. So if you think, oh, spider's eating my bees, better get rid of the spider, might not be the best decision because they are there for a reason and they'll be feeding other animals like the birds. So yeah, keep them around. They are really important.
In terms of kind of biomass, have you got any idea what percentage of a garden's wildlife would be spiders? Because, well, a lot of the time they're quite reclusive. You might not know they're there, whereas the bees are quite obvious buzzing around. Do you know what percentage they make up in general?
Good question. Probably a lot more than we think, because spiders are good at kind of staying out of the way. What I'd recommend is if you go out at night and just go for a little wander around with a torch, you might see quite a lot more spiders than you're expecting, particularly compared to the ones during the day. But a lot of them will kind of camouflage themselves and hide themselves away. There's going to be a lot more than we expect, definitely.
I think I've seen videos before of people going out with a torch at night, and I don't know whether they're doctored, but if you get the sort of angle of your torch right, you'll pick up the spiders sort of shining back at you. Is that a thing?
That's definitely a thing, yeah. So
Oh.
for my job, I do a lot of bat surveys at night and kind of newt surveys and things at night. So it's something that we spot all the time. Like when you've got a head torch on, you just see these kind of little faint glittery dots dotted around. A member of the BAS was actually doing some research on quite a rare species of wolf spider down on one of his local spots. And one of his survey methods was literally going around with a torch and counting the eye spots, because it's quite far away as well. When you see them, it's usually sort of 10, 12 feet away. You can see the glitteriness before you even know that there's a spider anywhere nearby.
And the other thing that I was going to mention, which is on the BAS website, on the homepage at the moment, in the news section, is that there is this much maligned spider known as the false widow, and it is becoming more prevalent, I think, in our homes especially. I think people are seeing them, people are learning how to identify them. Should we be worried about them?
I don't think we need to be worried about them at the moment. I think there's a lot of scaremongering, particularly with the false widows, maybe because they look like black widows and they look like some of the sort of more dangerous species that we might get abroad. Yeah, there's a lot of scary newspaper articles about these demon spiders invading us, going to poison all our children, all these things that necessarily aren't true. In the UK, anyway, we need to be quite considerate of things that we're talking about, because false widows, they might look a little bit freaky and they're quite kind of spiky, and they're quite large spiders as well, but they are relatively harmless to humans. They can inflict a little bit of a bite. It's kind of like bee sting sort of pain level, but they won't do any real damage. I think partly they might be becoming more common is because people are noticing them more. So they are probably increasing a little bit as well. And we see a lot of different species increasing their ranges and their popularity because of climate change. So anything that relies on warm weather is going to be doing really well and creeping further north. But the false widows, it's nothing that we really need to worry about. If you leave them alone, they'll just do their own thing. If you want to move them out, pop them in a pot, you can move them somewhere else. But I don't think it's something that we need to be necessarily scared of.
That is very good to know. So we don't need to go on a campaign to eradicate them at any time soon.
Of course not. And you think how many small invertebrates and insects they're going to be eating, they're going to make food for something else. So everything has its place. I'd keep an eye out, though, if you're going to another country. The rules don't apply here, but in the UK, we're okay.
Fair enough. I mean, my friend got bitten by, I think it was a woodlouse spider, and she jumped about a foot in the air. And house spiders can bite, so it's not just the false widows as well. They can give you a nasty
woodlouse
nip.
spiders have massive jaws. They're very impressive.
Oh, good. Oh, well, because we all took the mickey out for screaming. But okay, I'll let her know that she wasn't such a wuss after all.
I think just keep the handling to an absolute minimum when you can.
I think she accidentally picked it up and it retaliated. Yeah. So. Okay, so if people want to find out more and learn to love spiders, because I think a lot of people are very fearful, and I was when I was a child absolutely terrified of spiders, and now I'm, I love them, and I don't move them from anywhere, not even the corners of my house. I just, encourage them as much as possible. If people want to, like I say, learn to love them and find out more, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so just want to second that. I was scared of spiders when I was a kid as well, because my mum was, and she taught me that spiders are scary. So don't worry, you can all get over it. And I think the more you learn about them, the more you appreciate them, and dare I say, the more you like them. But check out the British Arachnological Society. We've got our website, we've got a YouTube channel as well, with some videos on kind of photography, the basics of spiders, and some research on conservation projects. So have a look at those. And I think just pay more attention to what's going on around you. Most of the records we get are from people sitting in their garden, looking around them and finding out what's there. I get photos pretty much every day of people sending me things. What is this spider? I found it in my garden. Is it an interesting one? So I think just take the time and have a look. But yeah, definitely check out the BAS website. We've got some resources on there. If you'd like to become a member, we do have a newsletter that goes out 3 times a year, and Arachnology journal as well, which is a bit more sciencey, but it might be something that you're interested in. And just keep in touch, really. We've got a very active Twitter X account called @BritishSpiders. Everybody takes it in shifts, so we do have somebody on there all the time to answer your questions, share photos as well.
Thank you very much to Meg for taking us on a journey into the world of spiders, and thank you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 3 about earthworms, released on July the 19th, 2018, and episode 103, Bugs in Your Garden, released on the 22nd of June, 2020. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.